If your first instinct every single time you see any kind of catastrophic human suffering is to say that the world is ending and it's too late to do anything about it, you are causing harm. Even if you weren't raised in an evangelical Christian household like I was, and you weren't raised with apocalyptic beliefs, you are feeding into a fatalistic mindset that not only causes so much undue fear and anxiety, it also completely dismisses the numerous complex causes for all of these global issues. This exact mindset, this fatalistic idea that there's nothing that anybody can do anymore, is the exact thing that's lining the pockets of all of the people causing these humanitarian crises in the first place. Because if we can all be convinced that the world is ending, there's nothing we can do anymore, the end is nigh, what is going to motivate any of the giant rich people controlling everything to change literally anything about what they're doing? There are also moral implications with this, whether you think so or not, especially if you were raised religious. Because when you frame suffering as a preordained part of your religious narrative, war, famine, disease are no longer tragedies that need to be stopped. They are part of a divine plan that needs to be brought to fruition. When you have this mindset and you couple that with a religious perspective, particularly a high-demand religion, it completely erodes the trust that we should have in science and in the experts who are actively working to solve these global crises. You guys know that I talk about the Hunger Games on here all the time. One line from the Hunger Games that I constantly think about is that there is only one thing greater than fear, and that is hope. The hope that the people have that the future might be better is the one thing that the governments and institutions are unable to take away from them. That also doesn't mean that everything is peachy and great and everything should stay exactly as it is right now, because the world is always ending for somebody. Just because your world right now is okay, it doesn't mean that it isn't ending for somebody else, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do something about it. I grew up in a very cult-like sect of Christianity, and my entire life I had a very naive idea that I could never be indoctrinated into a cult. That is, until I left the church, and I stopped consuming the fear-mongering ideologies I was raised with, and I started consuming the fear-mongering ideologies that were existent on the internet. Things like critical thinking and reading comprehension were things that were actively discouraged in the church. So when I left, I didn't necessarily have a set of tools to dissect the sources of my news. And instead of being completely distraught with fear about the potential rapture happening, I instead became hyperfixated on a different kind of end time. Even if those were not the exact words that I was using or believed, I still believed in end times theology. And I'd spent so long trying to get out of it, I was distraught, wondering why I was still so anxious and miserable all the time, and I genuinely felt like the world was going to end at any second. And part of the reason why the Hunger Games specifically is such an important series to me is because that is one of the first things that really taught me how to critically think about the content I consumed. The Hunger Games is what taught me what propaganda even was and how people weaponized it against each other. One of the first things that showed me I should not be taking the information I'm given at face value. The first thing that truly prompted me to start questioning everything. Because growing up, I was taught to question everything, but only as it pertained to God. I was supposed to question my biology teacher when they talked about evolution, or question anybody who may have had a coexist bumper sticker on the back of their car. Questioning God, or anything that God supposedly told you? Absolutely fucking not. So when I left the church and there was a giant gaping hole where God used to be, I needed something to replace that I could use as the ultimate authority on everything. And I had a lot of questions all at once about everything. So unfortunately, that big gaping hole was filled with misleading news sources and propaganda and things that I was primed for my entire life to eat up. I've heard so many people who are extremely well educated say that they wish they hadn't learned all of the things they've learned because it's made them an unhappy, anxious person knowing all of these terrible things that exist in the world. But after spending my entire life with everything I consumed or believed being fed to me through a filter, even though there is an overwhelming abundance of grief and pain and suffering in the world. I feel so much more hopeful that things could get better now that I've left the church and abandoned that apocalyptic mindset and have started to understand the why behind all of these things, instead of clocking it up to some divine abstract plan that nobody is ever going to be able to fully understand. This is all to say, you need to question literally everything. Everything. Not just the things that you know are bad. We are all susceptible to propaganda and manipulation and cult-like tactics. Nobody is immune, and it is so naive to think that you are. Because President Snow was a diabolical evil villain who weaponized propaganda against the citizens of Panem. And District 13 also weaponized propaganda against its citizens. It also controlled the flow of information in and out of the district. It also had a heavily militarized government. One was inarguably way better on the human rights front, and it was pertinent that they win so that real change could take place, but that didn't necessarily mean that they were the good guys. Do you know what I'm saying? Are you picking up what I'm putting down? Question everything you read. Question everything you're told. Even if it's something that you agree with, you should ask yourself why you agree with it. You don't have to doubt everything you believe all the time, but you should know why you believe what you believe. I view the Hunger Games movies as an entirely different series from the books. The main reason for this being that Peeta doesn't lose his leg in the movies. I understand most book to movie changes, but that's the one thing they changed I'm never going to understand the reason for. Because in the second book, Peeta not having one of his legs is a big point of contention. He's not only learning how to use a prosthetic, something that takes some amputees years to feel natural with, he's training athletically with a new prosthetic on a freshly chopped off leg. Like, that is so fucking badass. That is badass. And then in the movies, none of that happens. So he's thrust into the arena, but is still just as clumsy in the movies as he is in the books, even though there's no reason for him to be because he has both of his legs. So in the movies, he comes across as much more needy and weak. When out of their whole group, he was probably the closest thing any of them had to a career at that point, because he'd been training his ass off for months. It makes it that much more profound of a sacrifice for Katniss to enter in the arena with the sole intent of keeping Peeta alive, because she knew the fact that he'd just lost his leg and was learning how to use a prosthetic would be a large hindrance to their ability to win the entire game. Like, she went in there knowing full well that she would die, because unlike the last games that she and Peeta were both able to win, there is now a massive hurdle for both of them to get over. And it really shifts how I see Peeta in the movies versus how I see him in the books. Because in the movies, I'm not thinking about the fact that he lost his leg, because he has his legs. And so in turn, it also shifts how I see the dynamic between Katniss and Gale. Because it's almost to me as if they tried to make Peeta into a less desirable love interest by making him seem weak, so that they could make the love triangle more highlighted by making Gale seem like a more prominent love interest that way. Because when I go a really long time without watching the movies and I only read the books, I forget that Gale is a love interest in the first place. Like, he's such a fucking male podcaster. But the movies also rob him of so much dimension and nuance that makes him an absolutely incredible literary character, even though I hate his ass. The movies reduce him to a love interest with eyebrows and an attitude problem. And I love the movies. I love the movies. I say that every time. I love the movies, but it just makes them into a completely different series from the books. First video about the Hunger Games I ever made was about the fact that Katniss lost her hearing in one of her ears in the first book. And then when she wakes up from the surgery, they give her, to repair all of her injuries after the arena, the one where they wanted to give her a boob job at the age of 16, and then Haymitch told them no. Not enough people talk about the fact that the Capitol tried to give a 16-year-old girl a boob job. A boob job. Anyways, they fix her hearing in that ear, which becomes a very important plot point in the next book that they totally got rid of. Because when she's training with Beetee and Wyrus for the arena, they point out how to identify the force fields to her. And she's like, oh, that's an important Mouska tool that we're going to use later. But the Capitol can't fucking know she knows what the force fields look like because people have weaponized the force fields in the arena before, and that would have been really bad. And like, there's additional force fields inside of the arena now. They would not have known that if Katniss did not see the force field and point it out right as Peeta walked into it and almost died. And she was like, fuck, the Capitol can't know I know what the force field looks like. I'm gonna make it their fault, and I'm gonna say that they fixed my hearing so well that I could hear the fucking force fields in the arena. Now it's their fault. That's a fucking power play. Ugh, it's so frustrating. And you know what else? Jennifer Lawrence legitimately lost hearing in one of her ears during filming for Catching Fire because of the fucking condition she was kept under as an actor. Because in the spinny platform scene, the one that gave us that meme of Katniss and Joanna making a face at the camera, she was getting water shot into her ear at incredibly high speeds. And she got like multiple ear infections and had lasting hearing damage because of the ear infections she got from filming those scenes. Like when I say the movies are a completely different series, completely fundamentally different, down to the point where they just miss the point of the entire fucking series when they film it. I love the movies. Don't call me a fake fan for saying that the movies are different from the books. I just don't think they really got the point of the books when they made them. I'm gonna get heated about this, and not in a bitchy way, just in a passionate way, because I'm very passionate about this fan theory. The Hunger Games reapings being rigged does not mean that Prim or Katniss were specifically targeted and chosen by the Capitol. Because every time I say that, I firmly believe that post 10th Hunger Games, every single Hunger Games reaping was totally rigged. There's a billion commenters that say, but the whole point of the original story was that Katniss was randomly chosen and she was just a regular girl, and now she's a chosen one if the reapings are rigged, so it totally robs the story of any... She wasn't a chosen one. She was not a chosen one. That does not mean that the reapings were not rigged, because the Capitol was a propaganda machine set on completely controlling the narrative that they released to the Panem citizens, and the only way that they could do that on live television was if they had complete control over everything that happened on live television, which meant that they were 100% not going to just randomly draw a person from any district. Because, like, what if Gale had been drawn for the reaping? What if Gale had been drawn for the reaping? Do you think for a second that he would comply with the shit that they wanted him to do? He had nothing left to lose. He would not have gone with it. So I don't think that they had little cameras everywhere and they were speculating about who the perfect person to select for this reality TV show would be, but I do think that they 100% drew from specific demographics of citizens because they wanted to have the most entertaining games ever. If they left all of that up to chance, then they would not have control over the narrative for that year, and this is something that took a lot of planning. Especially when you just think about how many pairs of siblings have been chosen for the Hunger Games, how many children of victors have been selected for the Hunger Games, how many 12-year-olds are selected for the reaping, because even if they took out Tesserae, their name is only going to be in there a handful of times. Like, this is live national television being televised to an entire nation of an overly militarized dictatorship, and they would be fools to leave something that could so easily become out of their control up to chance. Which to me makes Katniss volunteering for Prim her first real public stance against the Capitol. They didn't have to worry about the volunteers in the districts that were in favor with the Capitol, but a volunteer from a district like District 12? A district that had only ever had 2 victors, both of whom won by taking advantage of one of the Capitol's blind spots in the arena? A district citizen acting on their own accord outside of the alignment that the Capitol had was in and of itself an act of rebellion. Even if in other districts it might not have seemed that way, because every district had their own ways in which they were forced to be dependent on the Capitol. And in District 12, they were kept in this continuous perpetual cycle of poverty, starvation, slavery, to the point where the only thing occupying their brain was how to get to the next day. They couldn't even conceptualize visualize what a rebellion would look like in that state. They were completely devoid of hope. So the reapings were not rigged so that Katniss would volunteer. That's not what the Capitol wanted to have happen. She destroyed their rigging process. And that makes it so much more profound that the Capitol was just overthrown on like a fucking Tuesday by some 16-year-old girl who just didn't want her sister to die. When she volunteered for her sister and threw off all of the Capitol's plans for what this Hunger Games was going to look like, she gave the district citizens hope for the very first time. And not only to her district, but to all of the districts that were not in favor with the Capitol and had been subject to similar conditions. The Capitol's very life force is false appearances. Even just in the literal way, with the glitz and glam of the Capitol just being a really thin membrane separating us from the ugliness that lies underneath. Even the narrator, Katniss, is incredibly unreliable, and you can't necessarily take everything she says at face value. So why out of everything in the books would we accept the Hunger Games reapings as the one thing that is just 100% true because the book said that that was how it happened, and to think otherwise would defeat the whole purpose of the story? I don't think that at all. I think it really highlights all of the points that Suzanne Collins makes in the story. Why would the Capitol give the option to put your name in more times for resources if they were rigging the reaping? There are a multitude of reasons as to why this could have been used as a manipulation tactic. One of the big ones to me is to create a culture of division within the districts themselves. Any form of unity was kryptonite to the Capitol, and they needed to create class division not just between the different districts, but within the districts. So even if the reapings were rigged and the amount of tesserae that you took out actually had no bearing on how many times your name was in the reaping bowl, you would have no way of knowing that, and all you would know is that there is now a culture of the haves and the have-nots. And this just breeds a culture of distrust and resentment within the district citizens themselves. You see this with how Gale interacts with Madge at the beginning of the first Hunger Games book. It isn't until they both realize that they have a common oppressor and they are both suffering under the same imperial system that Madge and Gale are able to find some common ground, and she's the one who brings him some of her mother's medication from the Capitol after he's been tortured for poaching a turkey. One of the first interactions between district citizens that I can recall in the series that really breaches this class divide. Tesserae itself was not what the Capitol had promised it to be. They weren't just giving away resources to the people who took out Tesserae. A lot of the people who got Tesserae didn't even receive their food rations. Food imports in and out of District 12 were again completely controlled by the Capitol. They could foster a culture of dependence on the Capitol by controlling how much food was imported into them. They lived in the Appalachian region. If you know anything about Appalachia right now, you know that it's fairly hard to access. So if they ran out of food that they could grow and produce within the district itself, they had to ask the government for assistance, and the government could decide whether or not to offer it. You see how this system is weaponized against the citizens of District 12 in Catching Fire when the rebellion is starting to bubble up and they start cutting off the resources to District 12 and stop sending Tesserae and stop sending food, and they stop sending the grain packages that they were entitled to as victors from the previous games. Even though that was the system they'd set up that they said they were going to do, they didn't have to do it. They made everything up as they went along. If there's one thing that I think is really important to take from these books, it's that nothing is ever as it seems. Even the stuff that you would never have thought to question on a million previous rereads, once you start to question them, it's like pulling a thread that starts to unravel everything else that you've read in the past. Yeah, a lot of these things are just theories. A Hunger Games theory. If you think differently, that does not mean that you are wrong. Like, Suzanne Collins is not here talking to us right now. He could very well come out tomorrow and be like, actually, President Snow always thought of Katniss as a daughter, and Katniss named her son Gale Coriolanus Coin. I don't know. I could be wrong about everything. She could change my mind on everything in 2 seconds. But that's my theories. A few steps into the woods grows a bank of wildflowers. Perhaps they really are weeds of some sort, but they have blossoms and beautiful shades of violet and yellow and white. I gather up an armful and come back to Rue's side. Slowly, one stem at a time, I decorate her body in the flowers, covering the ugly wound, wreathing her face, weaving her hair with bright colors. They'll have to show it, or, even if they choose to turn the cameras elsewhere at this moment, They'll have to bring them back when they collect the bodies, and everyone will see her then and know I did it. I step back and take a last look at Rue. She could really be asleep in that meadow after all. Bye, Rue, I whisper. I press the 3 middle fingers of my left hand against my lips and hold them out in her direction. Then I walk away without looking back. The birds fall silent. Somewhere, a mockingjay gives the warning whistle that precedes the hovercraft. I don't know how it knows. It must hear things that humans can't. I pause, my eyes focused on what's ahead, not what's happening behind me. It doesn't take long. Then the general birdsong begins again, and I know she's gone.
Let's do a fall book haul. These are all books that I've hauled this week. And yes, I will be doing it in my bonnet. First, I have Graveyard Shift. I read this book and I loved it. Personally, this book was for me. I know a lot of people found it very boring. I do agree that it ended very abruptly. But if you're someone who loves like gothic books, it's not Dark Academia, but it's set by a school, and there's students who go to that school, and it also is for the girls who have insomnia. Like, I read this at like 12 a.m. It was so much fun. So the girls who get it get it. It's Memory Caught Empire, and this is a space opera sci-fi book. I've already read this and I thought it was fine, but I listened to the audiobook and I decided I wanted to give it another try, like physically, because sometimes if it doesn't work in audio, give it a try somewhere else. The Twyford Code. I love this author. She writes a lot of mixed media thrillers. This one is my favorite by her. This one is told through like iPhone 4 recording. So it's told through like recordings, and this is my favorite one by her. It's so fun. Then I have S, and this is a mixed media book. This book was like a gem back in like BookTube's prime days, and now it's making its way around on BookTok. So obviously I had to buy it before it sells out everywhere. Then I have 2 celebrity memoirs because that is my favorite type of nonfiction. So I have I'm Glad My Mom Died, which I've already read and I loved. And then I have Britney Spears, The Woman in Me, which I also have already read and I loved. I have An Academy for Liars. I have started this book and I'm not having fun. I'm 116 pages into this book. I'm low-key slowly soft DNFing it. Everybody said this book is so amazing, it's so fun, they love it so much. When does that happen? And then lastly, I have The Gods of the Woods. This is making its way around on BookTube, so I decided to pick it up because it just gives that like fall vibe. And this is everything that I hauled this week. Even though this video that I'm responding to is old, I'm gonna respond to this comment because this video has like gotten like a new wave of going viral, and this wave of going viral, people are commenting the same thing and they keep asking why I won't say the word. I'm not saying the word because my video will get taken down. I don't know why people are acting like we're just so afraid of this word and we're not saying it because we want it to like lose its meaning. Have you ever considered that people videos will get taken down? Like, have we ever like what? And I'm not talking about like this comment specifically, but like people are acting like we're just so sensitive now and we just don't want to say the word. Have you ever considered that there are guidelines in the community, and sometimes you don't slip through it? For me, I get caught all the time. There are actually some things that I try to post that like I can't post, and they don't even violate the community guidelines, but I get like, oh, this violates the community guidelines, so you just can't post it. So I literally have to figure my way around posting it. They get me every single time. And actually, the reason why on this video specifically I didn't say it is because I just posted a video the day before about that trend. You know that trend that's going on where everyone is like, things that we did in our relationship that isn't conventional or whatever, and it would be like a girl going, we dated for 5 days and then we moved in together. I actually made a video and I was like, are y'all not afraid of DV? And I actually said the word beef. The video didn't even go up. It got taken out immediately. So that's why in this video I'm not saying the stupid word, but also it's just a word. Who cares if I say unalive instead of the actual word? Maybe I'm saying it because I don't want my video to get taken down. Okay, your videos might not get taken down for saying the word, but mine's don't even go up. They literally don't even go up. Also, I just don't know why people care so much. Like, I've gotten a huge influx of comments asking why. People like being mad that I won't say the word as if like I'm just like being sensitive or whatever. Maybe I'm not saying the word because I don't want my video to get taken down. Like, come on, like let's use our brains here. And it's just a word. Like, calm down.
There is something fundamentally wrong with you if you love horror movies.
I feel like there's one important thing to note is that not everyone is afraid of horror movies. I grew up in a family where my mom loved horror movies. Like, I was introduced to movies like 13 Ghosts, Jeepers Creepers, Final Destination, Freddy vs. Jason, like, at a young age. And so for me, horror movies just weren't that scary. And then once I was in like middle school, going to high school, I was going through a lot. So I ended up turning to horror movies as something that was comfort, because it was just something that I was always used to. And then my love for horror kind of ramped up. And then I just realized there was something about it that I just really loved and was comforting to me, which I guess could sound crazy to people, but they were never scary to me. Actually, there was a point where I'm able to tell when a movie is gonna have like a jump scare. So jump scares, they don't scare me. I'm able to like sense them out really well. The only way a jump scare can scare me is if I'm not paying attention to the movie and then it catches me off guard. That's the only way. But other than that, I'm able to sense when a jump scare is gonna happen. And I always turn to like horror movies. Like, there would be a point where I would like turn one on just for comfort. But also, the older I got, the more I started to realize that a lot of horror movies that I liked were horror movies that had social commentary. So like your Jordan Peele movies like Barbarian, movies like The Menu, like something that had like a movie that has something to say. Like, even the horror books that I read, I love a horror book that has something to say, and I find that a lot of social commentary is put into horror, and it's one of my favorite things. But also, I just love slashers. I don't really care about paranormal. I know a lot of people like paranormal, unless it's like vampires or something like that, but like ghosts, I don't really care for. But slashers are my go-to. I love gore, I love guts, I love throw up. I don't know what it is. Maybe that's insane to say, but also our brains are able to tell the difference between fiction and reality. So there's also that. And I love horror movies. This is my horror movie poster collection. And then also I have a collection of DVDs behind me. Not all of those are horror movies, but there was a point in my life when it was the only thing I would watch. Like, I wouldn't watch a rom-com, I wouldn't watch a comedy. I would literally be like, I'm gonna put on a horror today. And now I watch a little bit of everything. Well, I've always watched a little bit of everything, but like on a day-to-day basis, I would literally just put on a horror film. Like, it was just my comfort. And now I watch a little bit of everything. I love a period piece. I love rom-coms. I've always loved rom-coms, but I'm such a hopeless romantic that I have to stay away from rom-coms, because then I'll watch it and I'll be like, ugh, I wish I had a boyfriend. But then like in horror movies, you don't have to worry about that, because you aren't really supposed to have a boyfriend in horror movies, because you know. But I remember when I watched Scream, and he like gave the rules to like horror films, and like how actual horror films do follow all of that. Like, I just found it, I don't know what it is, I just found something very fascinating about it. Personally, for me, I'm more fascinated by horror than I am scared of it. Like, I really don't get scared. I think the last movie I got scared of was Longlegs, and that was because I was watching it at 1 a.m. and it got really creepy. The whole movie was really slow, and then it got really creepy out of nowhere, and I was like, and I wasn't expecting it because I didn't know what it was about. But that was like the only movie that I've been scared of like recently. But I don't think that there's anything wrong with like, there's nothing wrong with you if you like horror movies. And the fact that like people think that like just because you like something that they don't like, that there's something wrong with you, is very interesting to me. So Goodreads just released the top 78 most popular horror books over the past 5 years. I saw Aubrey do this, so I wanted to do this. I've read over 1,000 books, and I really just want to go through and tell you which ones I think you should read and which ones I think that you shouldn't read. Okay, so first on this list, the only one that I haven't read is Hidden Pictures. I actually didn't realize how well read I was in horror. Like, it's one of my favorite genres when it comes to like movies, but I didn't realize how well read I was when it comes to like reading them. So the only one I haven't read was Hidden Pictures, and usually if I don't read something, it's probably because it's on my TBR or because I heard like bad things about it, so I just skipped it. But like Stephen King, I do recommend to people who are interested in Stephen King. If you don't care about Stephen King, I wouldn't recommend it. I'm a fan of Stephen King, which is the only reason why. And then Grady Hendrix, I'm a huge fan of Grady Hendrix. He's one of my favorite horror authors. This is actually my favorite Grady Hendrix book. Well, my second favorite. My first favorite is the book that's coming out next year, because I had an arc. But I do recommend The Southerners Book Club Guide to Slaying Vampires. I think it's his best work. And then Home Before Dark. I'm not a huge fan of Riley Sager. Home Before Dark is his best book. No, it's actually, yeah, it's his best book. It's also the last book by him I ever read, because I read it one time. I'm not a huge fan of Bunny. Everyone loved it. I thought it was fine. Mexican Gothic, I'm not a fan of like ghost, paranormal type of things. Like, if I'm gonna read a paranormal, it's gonna be like vampire, werewolf, witches type of stuff. I'm not really a huge fan of like haunted houses or whatever, and that's what that is. So Okay, so the only one in this I haven't read is the Stephen King book, and that's because a lot of times with Stephen King I will just save my time, and then with Holly you have to read like a series and then another book before you've read it, and I just don't want to read the series, if I'm being real. The Last House on Needle Street I didn't love, and then Our Wives Under the Sea I also didn't love. I didn't love any of these books here. Okay, I did like the Final Girl Support Group. I don't think it's Grady Hinch's best. I actually wouldn't even recommend it to a lot of people. A lot of people don't like this book. I gave it 4 stars. I loved it. But I can recognize that a lot of people didn't like this. I'm not a huge fan of T. King Fisher. I read a lot of her books. I just think they're very short. Not a lot goes on. And Our Wives Under the Sea was fine. I just don't love it. There's nothing wrong with it. I will recommend it though. And so the only one that I read here is Our Share of Night. And I liked it. I thought it was fine. I do own Physically Imaginary Friend, but I've heard like very bad things about it, so I've been scared to read it. But I am interested in like the religious aspect, so I'm just gonna give it a go. And then Certain Hunger is actually on my TBR for this month. I do want to read The Only Good Indians, but I don't know, because like I want to love Stephen Graham Jones so much, but the books by him I have read I just don't love. Okay, so I haven't read any of these on here. I am interested in My Heart is a Chainsaw. I'm a slasher girl. That's why I'm interested in this book. But like I said, the books by him I have read I don't love, so I'm very nervous. And then I do want to read Night Bitch, but I just haven't gotten around to it yet. I do want to get to it before the movie. And then I'm not a huge fan of Mona Awad, I realize, so I want to read Rogue, but because I have this need to read everything, which is why I've read so many books. So I have this need to read everything, but it's like, girl, you don't have to. Like, I've read Oswell, Slewfoot by Brahm. I love Slewfoot. I gave this 5 stars. Highly recommend. Plain Bad Heroes is on my TBR. I keep putting it off because I don't hear a lot of people talk about it, so I keep getting scared. It's like not that great, but I own it, so obviously it's in my physical TBR. I'm gonna get to it. Okay, so like I said, Team Kingfisher, just not for me. I have read Ring Shout. I do recommend it. I do really enjoy it. I do want to read The Reformatory and Vampires of El Notre, but I don't know why they're not marked as read. Maybe I'll get some this month. I think that'll be fun. So as we get further down the list, there are just things that I haven't read. I don't think I like Alexis Henderson. I'm currently reading Academy of Liars. I think it's kind of... it's really slow right now, so I don't know. I'm a little worried I'm not gonna love it. I didn't love her first book, I want to call it The Witching Hour so bad, but I don't think that's what it's called. But so I'm very particular about my vampires. Like, I love vampires now, and I was just scared I wouldn't like this, so I just didn't read it. Mother Thing I started in DNF'd. Sign Here I actually do recommend. I think it's it's an underrated book. I think it's really fun. I think it's really good. I think it's just very underrated. And then Team Kingfisher I'm just done with reading. The Book of Accidents I'm really interested in, but I've heard nothing but terrible reviews, so I don't even want to waste my time. Okay, so I do want to read Monstrelio and Jackal. I don't know why they're not marked as want to read, but whatever. I don't like Rachel Harrison. She focuses a lot on like female friendships, which, you know, if you like that, I do recommend, which I love friendships in books, but it's like, after so long, girl, just make them kiss. Like, after so long, it's only so much I can take of female friendships before I'm like, just make this about sapphics. Like, I just don't understand. And then Dead Silence, skip. I'm sorry. I love sci-fi, and I was so excited for a sci-fi horror. Very much skippable. Summer Sons I didn't necessarily love, but I do still recommend it because there's an audience out there. I just think it just wasn't for me specifically, but I do recommend it. Come From Me with Apples I do want to read. I want to read it this month, but I'm a little nervous, so I don't know. And I don't know if I said this, but as we get closer to the lower of the list, you're going to see less and less of want to read. Typically because I've heard things about these. Well, actually not Natural Beauty. I haven't heard anything about Natural Beauty. I have read an Ian Reid book. I didn't love whatever that book was called. I didn't love it. And then Incidents Around the House. I don't like, ooh, Scary Doll, ooh, Ghost. And Josh Mellerman writes a lot of those. He wrote one of my favorite books ever. It was a short story called The House at the Bottom of the Lake. Have not read him since because he doesn't write anything that I care about. I read I Was a Teenage Slasher. I didn't love it. The Salt Grows Heavy. Very much skippable. Very boring. Very much nothing happens. This being the only Paul Tremblay book that's on here saddened to me because I haven't read it, but also I think that the Paul Bears Club was so amazing. It's a very like, not everyone's gonna get it, but the girls that get it type of book, and it makes me upset that it didn't make it, but I knew that it wasn't. Okay, I'm not that delusional. And then lastly, I have not read anything on here. I'm very excited for The Eyes Are the Best Part. It's on Kindle Unlimited. I don't have Kindle Unlimited, but I'm kind of wanting to buy it now because I kind of want to get into it, but I don't know if that's a great idea. Oh, I was gonna read Manhunt, but then I was really excited for it to come out, and then I was like in my party girl era, and then after that I kind of just didn't care about the book anymore. So maybe I want to go back to it, but I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, these are all the books that I've read. I've never even heard about like those two, but yeah, I'm actually very surprised that I've read a lot of these because I didn't think of myself as like that well read in horror, but
the southeast of the United States was just hit by a storm so devastating that parts of Florida are absolutely decimated. People are being rescued by boat from their homes in Georgia. Even parts of Appalachia are underwater. So far, the bad storm turned Category 4 hurricane has claimed 57 lives. The number is still rising. On the heels of this, 2 more tropical disturbances are currently forming in the Gulf of Mexico. Meanwhile, over the last year, in countries like Zimbabwe, droughts have gotten so severe and starvation so bad that officials have declared states of emergency. The endless bombings committed by Israel are so bad that it is speeding up climate change. All of the crimes and the injustices that got us to this degree of climate change that we will all suffer from, have gone unpunished. The 2 climate activists who threw soup on the glass covering protecting Van Gogh sunflowers have now gotten a combined 3 years and 8 months in prison. They'll be doing time in prison for throwing soup at glass for protesting climate change. Meanwhile, the people who are changing the climate, ruining the earth, and ruining our lives, costing lives, are getting away with it scot-free, even being encouraged, even being protected. The air is dirty, the water is dirty, homes are being destroyed, people are starving, and the only people paying any sort of price for all of this are the people trying to change it. I know we all feel really hopeless sitting here watching the people in power blatantly disregard our wants, our needs, our demands, our lives, our safety, and the safety of millions of others. However, it is not all hopeless. We can still do something, even if our something isn't a ton. One thing that we can do is vote, and I'm not just talking about in the presidential election, even though that's what we're all thinking about. There are 468 seats up for re-election in Congress this election cycle. We can vote. We can pressure candidates. We can do a lot with that. We can also continue to protest. We can also continue to boycott. I know a lot of people are dropping the ball on the boycotts. We need to pick them back up, especially when it comes to the release of the new iPhone. I know everybody's like, oh my gosh, what about the new iPhone? What about Congo? We can also continue to protest, even though I just said that. There are many, many, many protests happening, both this weekend and in upcoming weekends as we approach the 1-year anniversary of the Geno slide happening in Palestine. If you are a person in a position of privilege and a position of safety, do not be afraid to lean into civil disobedience or kind of rocking that boat, because we can peacefully protest day and night and they will tell us to move and go home and carry on. But your safety and well-being is the priority. Do not forget that. And even outside of boycotting, we can continue to have these conversations with people who may or may not already be on our side. It's easy to continuously preach to the choir. We need people in that moderate middle stance to actually take a stand. I'm not saying you need to go argue with your most conservative uncle. That might not be safe for you, nor is it particularly wise. If you have an aunt who's this is really bad, but convince them that but is not enough. There's strength in our voices and in our dollars if enough of us are backing up a cause. We can do it. We just need to do it. But yeah, also it does really suck to just be a drop in the bucket. So let's have a lot of drops in the bucket. Please do not forsake and condemn the South, because we are the South. Every single time there is a natural disaster or some type of horror, people are like, oh, well, they deserve it. Florida deserves it. North Carolina deserves it. Texas during the Big Freeze deserved it because they tend to vote red. Do not forsake these people. Do not forget and condemn us. I mean, for starters, it shows your ignorance when it comes to voting and voting rights in the South. It shows that you're unaware of the decades and decades of gerrymandering and redistricting and general discrimination and disenfranchisement that people in the South face as a barrier to voting. There are disabled folk and queer folk and BIPOC who all want to vote and yet face systemic barriers to doing so. They do not deserve to be condemned to die because of it. And even if everybody in the South votes red, which I cannot stress enough, they don't. People still do not deserve to be condemned. They didn't ask for this. They didn't vote for this. It is incredibly easy to prey upon people who are ill-informed, misinformed, afraid, impoverished, and that's what happens with politicians in the South on a regular basis. Oftentimes, people who vote red are looking for someone to save them from the horrors of the world, real or manufactured, and just because politicians prey on that and then abandon them doesn't mean that people should suffer. People didn't vote to suffer, and even if they did, the people who didn't vote to suffer, the children who can't vote or disabled folk who can't get to the polls or all the people who are disenfranchised don't deserve to suffer. And to say so, to think so, to believe that, oh, we're better off without Florida, oh, North Carolina asked for this, oh, whatever, is ignorant and elitist. Y'all feel like just because you live in a state that is blue, you deserve the right to live and the right to survive, and that's not true and that's not fair. Stop writing the South off and all of the diverse people who live here just because the states tend to be red. If you're looking at the states that have been devastated by Hurricane Helene and you're going, but they should have just evacuated. My question is, what about the people who didn't know they were supposed to evacuate, who would have never planned to evacuate? What then? Because there are people who absolutely can't evacuate, like disabled people, or there are people who were intentionally left behind, like people in prisons, who are often not even included in the people who don't survive the storm afterwards. There are lots of people who can't leave. And y'all write them off every time we have this talk. But this time my question is, what about the people who would have never expected needing to evacuate? What about them? Because right now the city of Asheville is reeling after being destroyed by Hurricane Helene. And if you didn't know this, Asheville is in the mountains. The mountains. A mountain town would have never prepared to evacuate or even prepare for a hurricane with devastating flooding because they live in the mountains, far away from the coast. And the mountains in North Carolina are decently inland, too. Clearly, y'all are okay with throwing away the lives of people who heard about evacuating and then couldn't, whether they didn't have the resources, didn't have the money, didn't have the support, didn't have a place to go, didn't have the physical abilities to. You're okay with throwing them away. But I want you all to know that as climate change gets worse and worse and we get more once-in-a-lifetime events like hurricanes wrecking mountain towns, I want you to know that you're not going to always be ready to evacuate. You're not always going to know to evacuate. Sometimes you're just going to be stuck. And if that happens to you, and I'm saying if because I'm praying we don't let it get so bad that it's absolutely a when, but if that happens to you, you're going to want people to have some empathy and some care for you. You're not going to want them to say, well, why didn't you just leave? You're going to want people to care. So you should care now. Being sarcastic, making jokes, making light of the absolute devastation that has happened in the wake of Hurricane Helene makes me sick. But I don't want you all to drink up the water. I want you all to help. First things first, if you ain't got nothing nice to say, the most helpful thing that you can do is shut up. We don't need your jokes, your tee-hees, you're making light of the situation, your whole, oh my gosh, the trash is taking itself out because the storm happened in the South. If you ain't got nothing useful to say, shut up. People are missing. People aren't with us anymore. Whole homes are destroyed. You can't even get in and out of some of these cities because the whole roads are decimated. If you ain't got nothing good to say nothing. Next, if you live in any of these states, like I live in North Carolina, and you've got extras of anything to donate to a resource point near you, please do so. Like my daughter outgrew newborn diapers real quick, so we have a ton left. I'm hoping to donate some of those in the upcoming days. Most of all, for everybody, if you have a few extra dollars to spare, please consider donating them to a resource group, an organization, a mutual aid fund, anything. And it doesn't just have to be the Red Cross. I donated to the Operation Airdrop Hurricane Helene Relief. I'm from North Carolina. I obviously care very deeply about North Carolina. I have a lot of friends and loved ones who are impacted by this. So I'm going to drop an LINK in the comments that has like a bunch of resources that you can consider donating to. But above all else, if you ain't got nothing nice to say nothing. At least let us find and bury our bodies before y'all start cracking jokes and being sarcastic. Hi, have you seen my face before? Do you know my content? Do you follow me? If the answer is yes or no to any of these things, my name is Jordan and I'm from North Carolina. And my state in the mountains just got decimated by a hurricane. Yes, the mountains got destroyed by a hurricane. I, like you, have friends and loved ones. People who have guest starred in my TikToks, people who have always answered the phone when I called them, whether it was big or small, people who dropped everything after I had my daughter to come help out, even if it was installing the car camera into my car or holding her so that I could take a nap. I have friends, much like you have friends. Some of my friends, these amazing loving people, much like the amazing loving people that you know, live in the mountains, these very same mountains that were destroyed by this hurricane. These are their homes and their livelihoods and their loved ones that are gone missing or are no longer with us. My friends, like your friends, are struggling. And when you say things like, oh, well, they deserve this. Oh, well, they voted for this. Oh, well, the trash is taking itself out because this is the South. Not only is that untrue, but you're talking about the people that I love and care about, the people who are much like your friends and loved ones. See, I'm putting my name and face out here to hopefully make a connection to you, to make it a little bit more realistic. Because it's easy to think, oh, well, Disney's in Florida, or such and such celebrity is from Georgia, or whatever way have you, and you don't quite feel attached. I want you to feel attached. I want you to know that my name is Jordan, and I have friends and loved ones whose lives have been horribly changed for the worse by this storm. And when you talk bad about the South, you're talking bad about me and the people that I love. So instead of acting like an ignorant and elitist a-hole, writing off lives that have been decimated by a natural disaster that they could do nothing about, let's do something to help. If you see a mutual aid fund pop up, which might take some time because they have no internet and no power most of the time, please consider donating to it, especially if it's a mutual aid fund for a smaller community. Like my best friends don't live in Asheville. They live in a small town outside of Asheville called Fairview. If you have any extras of anything, extra food, extra clothes, extra diapers, and baby wipes, she outgrew her newborn diapers recently, and so we donated those. Please consider donating them. These people have lost everything, and I mean everything. And above all else, please remember to have empathy and to be kind. Not only will climate change come for all of us, because it will, but remember that I am like you and that my friends are like your friends, and right now my friends need our help. I watched the vice presidential debate last night, and while I don't think anything happened that was so groundbreaking, it would like really shift the needle, I am really stuck on this one thing, and that thing is just how many times they called, like both of them, called this current administration Kamala Harris's administration. I think we keep forgetting she's not the president. And I'm not saying this to justify her action or inaction or her silence on many, many things, but I am saying this because both of those men up there, as well as I think many of us, are forgetting that she just is not the president right now. Like the person calling the shots, the person making the final say-so, is Joe Biden. And in fact, while Kamala Harris might be the VP now running for president, it's not lost on me that Donald Trump is running for president again. He was the president before this, and before him, Joe Biden was the vice president. And since administrations and the country doesn't exist in little like 4-year increment vacuums, but instead are constantly building on top of each other, it's not lost on me that the country looks the way that it does right now because of the actions of earlier administrations, including Donald Trump's and Obama/Joe Biden's. It's almost as if Kamala Harris is becoming the scapegoat for Joe Biden and his actions during his presidency and his administration in a way that we haven't seen for other presidents and the people in their administration. And so while it is important to hold Kamala Harris accountable for her action and for her inaction, it's also important to remember that she's not the only person up there who has had the capacity to make great change and then didn't. In fact, she is the person who has had the least amount of time and also power to enact this great change, and yet she's a scapegoat for it not happening. And so in the name of fairness, I think it's important to remember that this is not the Harris-Biden administration. This is the Biden-Harris administration. And it came after the Trump-Pence administration. Let's remember who has the final say and who has the power in a lot of these dynamics, because the amount of times that they blamed Kamala up there was nuts. Devastation from Hurricane Helene on Western North Carolina is exponentially worse than we think it is. And a large part of that is because Western North Carolina is made up of more than just Asheville. What I mean by that is that while Asheville might be the major city, there are dozens of smaller communities surrounding Asheville. They're not getting nearly the same amount of press, the same amount of attention, or the same amount of resources that Asheville is. Like my friend who lives in a town just outside of Asheville called Fairview didn't start receiving any type of aid until about 4 or 5-ish days after the storm. Meanwhile, it's these smaller communities that have been completely washed away like Chimney Rock. And while these are the communities that largely need our aid and our support the most, it's really hard to get it while they're being underreported on like mainstream media. And they also can't report on themselves because they still don't have things like cell phone service or internet access or even power in many scenarios. We know that the government doesn't really care, as police officers are arresting people who are quote unquote looting, which is essentially walking into a store that is closed and will be closed to get access to the resources that they need, like food and water. The devastation will likely continue to get worse as things like landslides continuously plague the area. My point being, while we're looking out for community aid and community support, please don't forget these smaller towns and smaller communities outside of Asheville, because they really need our hope the most.
Baby, a reading slump ain't nothing but a mindset, okay? Snap out of it. You've been going in and out for the past month and a half. It's getting ugly. It's getting ugly up there. It's time for us to take this very seriously because it's getting into spooky season. It's almost October. October is actually, it's hours away. So it's time for you to pick up the pace. Get it together. I'm an advocate for removing things off the internet if I think they're harmful to society, right? That being said, these Cosmopolitan photos of the OBX boys, yeah, they're gonna need to go. They're gonna need to go because I was drop-kicked by those images today, and I truly did not even know what to do with myself. Especially Drew. Drew Starkey, you're going to jail. You're going to jail. Delete them. Delete them. Here's some bookish things I cannot be bothered to care about anymore. I may have cared about them in the past. I don't care anymore. You could not pay me to care. Number one, dog earing your books. I don't care. I personally don't do it because I think bookmarks are a part of the experience, but look, gasp, the audience gasps. I don't care. Let me be very clear. If you're one of those people that memorizes the book page you're on, that is terrifying. You scare me. Stay away from me. Number two, creasing the books. Now, I use The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin as an example because, one, this book is amazing. If you haven't read it yet, hello, you need to pick it up and read it. But I had to crease the hell out of this book, and I did not care. Why? Because it was so stiff. I'm telling you, I could have held the book like this and not a single flop would happen. Now there's a little bit of a flop, you get what I'm saying? I creased this book because if I didn't, I would have been reading it like this. And what kind of experience is that? Listen, I'm just trying to enjoy myself, okay? Number three, I do not need dual POV for a romance book to be good. In fact, I will tell you this right now. Sometimes no dual POV is better because in what world am I deciding to go into the mind of a man? Oh, shut that down right now. Here, I have some incredible romance books that are not dual POV. Obviously, I'm not going to include Emily Henry in this because I'll have the whole stack of her books and like we don't need to go through all that. Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young. Incredible book, literally 5 out of 5 stars. This does not need dual POV. The man is still incredible. You still know he's incredible. You don't need to be in his mind. Next, You with the View by Jessica Joyce. Also incredible. No dual POV and we love the man. Number 3, 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. My sister has my copy of this. If you're watching this, I want it back. All 3 of these books, you literally did not need dual POV. I actually think it would have weakened the book if it had it. I don't care about dual POV. I don't care. Number 4, cartoon covers in romance books. I don't care, not even one bit. I've been seeing people make arguments about how, oh, if we don't change the covers of these books, like kids are gonna pick them up and think that they're for them. You guys need to understand that if you're a child, if you're that young, your parents need to be monitoring what you're reading. That's not anybody's job other than mama and da. Do I think cartoon covers are always the cutest? No, but like Exhibit A, I literally just showed you a book with a cartoon cover on it and it was incredible. Don't judge a book by its cover. Sometimes I do, but like in some cases don't, you know? Number 5, sprayed edges. I think they're beautiful. I don't think they're necessary to the special edition experience. I think it's gotten to the point where people care so much about sprayed edges that they're like willing to put them on paperback. And I think that that is a criminal offense. A sprayed edge, this video is slowly turning into things I actually care about. But I genuinely think that if you have gotten to the point where you care so much about a sprayed edge, you're gonna put on a paperback. Anyway, maybe my next video will be things that I do care about, because clearly I have some thoughts. Here's some tips for getting out of a reading slump. It's a very dark place to be in. I honestly wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. It really feels like you can't read a book, you can't pick up a book without going cross-eyed. Unacceptable. Tip number 1, switch formats. If you typically read books in the physical form, it's time to go to ebooks. Now, you don't need an e-reader to do this. You can really use any other device that you have. You can even use your phone if you want to, but I'm telling you something, as somebody who is in the middle of a slump right now, not only is the book I'm reading saving me, but also the fact that I'm reading it on here with the font zoomed in on 100% is sure as hell helping me. Yeah, it is. I don't know what it is about switching formats that resets my brain, but it really does work. Number 2, you need to be switching up genres. If you're only a romance girl, if you're only a lit fic girl, if you're only a fantasy person, it's time to start weaving into other categories. I know it's hard if you're used to one thing, but I'm telling you, I used to be the type of person where I couldn't read books from the same genre back to back. Like I actually needed to switch genres. Now I can read back to back. The issue is it puts me at risk for the slump. No bueno. Okay, no bueno. Switch it, flip it, reverse it, bop it, twist it. Number 3, read shorter books. I find I typically go into slumps when I'm reading longer fantasy books because I think my brain is like, high alert, babe. Why are you reading this dictionary? You're tired, you're exhausted. When you pick up shorter books to read, any genre, it could be any genre you want, you're just gonna get through them quicker and it's gonna be less daunting. And that's how you kind of reset your brain. Number 4, and this is really one of those things you're gonna be looking at me, you're gonna be like, baby, I don't got money for that. If you do though, I'm telling you this is helpful. You need to read immersively with the audiobook and the physical book. This is a big one. It has truly saved me in some trying times. I know it's a little expensive, okay? But desperate times call for desperate measures. Are you serious about getting out of this or not? I'll wait. Lastly, number 5, you're gonna be like, I don't want to hear this, but it's kind of true. You may just have to wait it out. Your brain is telling you, calm Calm. You don't need to be reading back to back like this. And sometimes you just need to listen. I know we all hate it, but it's true. Personally, me, I'm gonna work through the first 4 before I ever get to number 5 because I refuse to accept that reality. But sometimes it is the reality. I hope this helped. I really hope you're not in a slump. If you are, RIP, I guess. But I hope you can make your way out of it. Here are some bookish things I actually really do care about, deeply, deeply care about, to the point where if I see these things done, my blood will start boiling in my veins like soda. Number 1, let me take you on a journey. You walk into someone's house and they say, let me show you my bookshelf. And they walk you into their little library, their little book nook, their little corner, and it's rainbow shelves. They organize the books by rainbow colors. I will literally stop, close my eyes, turn around, scream at the top of my lungs, and see myself out the front door. I don't know what overtook your soul to make you do that, but please don't do it again. Number 2 is real people on the book cover. I don't want to judge a book by its cover, but I am telling you, I unfortunately will not be picking up the book if it has a real person on it. Number 3, different cover art on books depending on what country you live in. As an American, I'm very bitter about this because you UK people, the book covers that you get, ooh, I want to rob you. Ooh, I want to rob you. Exhibit A, I have a UK cover of Sally Rooney's Intermezzo. The US cover is really not that bad. I just prefer this one. But I get so upset when I see that other countries have better book covers than us. Number 4, this is more on the bookish community. Stop complaining when the book is taking longer than 5 months to come out. It's been like 3.5 minutes. Why? What are you doing? You do not have a seat at this table. And lastly, number 5, small font and narrow line spacing. I should have put this in number 1. I have 20/20 vision. Okay, not to flex on them though. Not to flex on. I can see very well. But that doesn't mean you need to make the font microscopic. I'm over here weeping for my brothers and sisters that wear glasses. I'm weeping for them. Every time I want to go to the next line, I'm skipping 3 or 4 lines. And you have the letters so small, and for what? Do you not want me to be able to see these words? I thought the whole point was that I could read your book. The moment I crack open a physical book and the font is too small, it's getting closed and the Kindle's getting open. I'm not here to play that game with my eyesight. Anyway, that's it. I'm currently in a reading slump. One of my favorite activities to do when I am in a reading slump, when I'm really trying to bust that slump, is pick books that are sub 300 pages off my shelf and try to prioritize those books. This is just because I feel like when you're in a slump, reading is very daunting, and if you pick up a very thick book that looks like a dictionary, baby, you're never gonna get through that. You know what I mean? So these are some of the books that I have on my TBR, especially because it's spooky season, so we have some spooky reads in here that I'm really hoping will help break me out of this slump. Book number 1, we have Big Fan by Alexandra Romanoff. First line on the back says, a political strategist, her former boy band crush, and what happens when teenage yearnings take a very adult and very sexy turn. What? Somebody in the political realm, ex-boy band crush from childhood? What's going on here? I am intrigued. Book number 2, we have White Nights by, if I bother to say this man's name, Dostoevsky, one of the best writers of all time. Crime and Punishment, The Brothers Karamazov, like, you name it, he wrote it. This is actually a short story, but I bought it in book form, therefore it counts as a book. I actually have a collection of his short stories that I stole from my dad, but I really liked the cover of White Knight, so I just went and got that anyway. Sorry, not sorry. He writes the psychological, the human condition in a way that really no one else does it, so I'm really excited about this. I should say he wrote, because he's no longer with us. Next we have Graveyard Shift by ML Rio. I have not read If We Were Villains, and I think that this will really just kind of dive me into ML Rio's world before I get into If We Were Villains. This is about 5 people who work the night shift in a cemetery on a college campus. Thriller, mystery, something crazy has happened in that damn cemetery, and they gotta find out what the hell's going on. And lastly, we have Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reed. Y'all know I really enjoyed A Study in Drowning, so I really felt that this was calling to me. This is about a young witch who seeks to discover her identity and escape the domination of her ruthless wizard father. Sold. You don't have to say anything else. I'm sold. Heard from some people that this may not be for everybody, but I also heard that about A Study in Drowning, and I really enjoyed that one. It was one of those books that I really had to sit with for a little while after, and the rating went up. So hopefully I'm really digging this. This is the wrong month to be in a slump. Any other month, God, any other month. But we will break through. I promise you that.
Spoilers for the illustrated edition of The Hunger Games, but I need to just talk about the panel that tore my heart from my chest. I have never seen the scene where Thresh kills Clove depicted like this, because this is a scene that has been historically misconstrued as a glorious and I'd argue borderline karmic moment. I've never seen an illustration that takes pains to establish there is nothing to be triumphant over in this moment, and what I think communicates that message the most clearly is the fact that I've never seen Thresh depicted this childlike. I've actually never seen Thresh drawn to be the boy that he actually is, because in book he's described as being over 6 feet tall and relatively well built, qualities we associate with grown men. But the thing is, I work with boys around Thresh's age, 16 going on 17, 17 going on 18. Some of my boys are also over 6 feet tall. Some of them can grow full beards, some of them have deep voices, and each and every one of them is completely and utterly convinced they look like a man. And they ask me directly, they'll say, "Miss, do you think I could pass for over 18? Because I suppose that's a badge of honor among them." And regardless if they have the height of an older man, they always without a doubt look like boys. I say, "No, you look like a tall child." You ever see the way that a greyhound adolescent is built? Sure, you're tall, but anybody with 2 working eyes and a lick of common sense can tell you're just a baby. And yet, although Thresh is among the older tributes in the arena, and there are certain advantages conferred by that, I've never seen a panel that depicts Thresh as vulnerable and disoriented and deeply afraid as any child would be in these circumstances. This is the first time, both in book and in movie, that Thresh kills offensively, and it's a moment that's often viewed as being an impassioned attempt to garner whatever justice is available within the arena. And the overwhelming majority of the people that watch the movie and read the scene are not going to imagine Thresh as being afraid in the aftermath, or any regrets or remorse, but look at his face. This is the face of when your worst envisioned future becomes reality. And what makes this moment particularly striking to me is that in book, this is the moment that Thresh realizes he's likely going to die, taking what is already such a deeply tragic moment and then amplifying the tragedy tenfold. Spoiler. Part of the reason that I have yearned for biblically accurate mutts when it comes to the 74th games, aka the animal-human hybrids described in book, is because these mutts specifically are entirely unlike anything else we encounter within the games in terms of their political messaging, in that I feel there's a convincing argument to be made they were specifically designed to negate the effect of Rue's burial. There's been a common fan conception for years that game makers by default incorporate parts of deceased tributes into the mutts, but that's not necessarily true. The overwhelming majority of the mutts we encounter are just animals. Unnatural, augmented, but animals nonetheless. This is an idea that emerges due to the descriptions that we receive of the mutts in the 74th games, with the mutts in question being described as having a striking resemblance to deceased tributes in terms of their fur color, features, and eye color. The eyes in particular being so hyper-realistic that PETA fears momentarily the game makers have used the tribute's real eyes, although whether or not this actually happens is never confirmed. And while though this animal is admittedly difficult to envision, there have been some truly grotesque takes on how it visually manifests. But these mutts themselves are distinct anomalies. They contain a level of excessive detail the Capitol typically wouldn't just wind up giving out to any particular feature of the arena. Now, a key aspect of how the Capitol maintains control is through the dehumanization of its subjects, and the Hunger Games are notably a major example of this. But there's also several other smaller, insidious ways this is done. And the type that most frequently pops up within the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is the desecration of district citizens' bodies. And the bodies of tribute specifically are easily among the most politicized. They are made public spectacles of, showcasing that in the eyes of the Capitol, the district's children are not worthy of what many consider to be the most fundamental basic human rights, and that in this society, not even death will grant you dignity. So Katniss taking the time to publicly honor and memorialize Rue's body is directly in defiance of this message, hence the need for even stronger political messaging that reinforces the opposite. And to the Capitol, the most effective means of accomplishing this is selecting a symbol that reinforces the message of the games as a whole, that in their eyes, the district citizens are fundamentally animal and will tear themselves to pieces within a moment's notice. Part of the thing that I find so funny about the lady that's been going around saying that if you enjoy horror movies, that means there has to be something fundamentally wrong with you, is that not only is it the most chronic case of, but what if I don't like bean soup syndrome I've seen in my entire life, it completely negates the fact that horror movies are essentially time capsules. There is no other genre where you can take popular trends over the course of, say, a decade and then be able to immediately clearly identify what prevalent cultural fears were at the time. What did people fear politically? What did people fear socially? What did people's notion of justice consist of? What constituted the difference in the eyes of the common man between a person that deserved to live and a person that deserved to die? To understand what an individual fears is to understand why they operate the way they do. And in the instance of horror, we're not just talking about individuals, we're talking about institutions. And so to say there is no inherent value in examining the taboo or the macabre is just, in my opinion, a disservice. Now, taste is subjective. All of this laid out, there are still going to be thousands of people that hate watching horror movies. And I'm never going to take one of those people and say, but you have to understand how zombies have historically reflected America's worst cultural fears. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. We can watch When Harry Met Sally and have a fabulous time. But I find it just incredibly silly to say, and this is not a dig at this specific woman because this is an attitude I see hashed out all the time. Well, I engaged with the genre in the most shallow, surface-level manner imaginable. And I didn't like it. And I think anyone that liked it is wrong. You didn't even try. A lot of fiction isn't fun if you take it that literally. The thing that... Because Thresh's most important moment is as explosive and emotionally intense as it is, this has led to a mischaracterization of him as a warrior on par with, if not even slightly superior to, the careers themselves. And this couldn't be more far off from the case. Now, Thresh has a considerable amount of advantages when compared to other tributes in that his body is physically in good condition, he's there on the cusp of adulthood, and he comes from a district whose tools could double as blunt or sharp weapons. But Thresh is nowhere remotely near to a trained fighter that has been specifically and professionally prepared to survive this exact scenario. Thresh is also from a district where people are publicly whipped for eating the food they harvest, where children are executed for petty, minor crimes that can be corrected in nanoseconds. This is not a district where one's want to survive and rebel are compatible. So he also has quite literally a lifetime of psychological conditioning that the best way to survive and make it to the next day is to duck down and lay low, which is exactly the strategy that he employs. The second the buzzers sound off, he retreats into the area of the arena that most strongly resembles his home and stays there for the majority of the games. And there's absolutely nothing within the books, at least, that gives me the impression that Thresh is legitimately attempting to win the games as a whole, over him attempting to avoid dying. Aren't these things the same, you ask? No, they're not. His decision to kill Clove is completely impulsive and driven by two factors. Him already being at something resembling a psychological breaking point, and the guilt that he feels in regards to his own self-perceived failure to protect Rue, especially given the information that had just been released that they could have in theory won the games together. It's even further worth noting that a huge aspect of why he responds so violently is because Clove gives him the impression that she tortured Rue to death. But that being said, it's not something he plans, and I'd argue it's something that he doesn't know how to respond to in the aftermath. Katniss says herself that she can see he's emotionally conflicted. She can see that he doesn't know what to do with himself. We can also safely assume he likely has the realization immediately after that Cato will kill him. So when he instructs Katniss to leave him immediately and that he'll let her go just this once, it's more so a get away from me this instant so I can attempt to pull what's left of my life back together over a direct threat to kill her. Because the thing that strikes me the most about this illustration of Cato running from the Mutt Pack is that in this moment, Cato is forced into the exact position he's trained his entire life to avoid. This is the first moment within his games that he experiences a reversal of the dynamic that he's grown accustomed to. The hunter becoming the hunted. The leader of the career pack being pursued by a literal pack. And what is most important about this moment is that this is the moment that most heavily affirms to Cato the reality of what these games are. 3 of these mutts are intentionally designed to be cruel, hideous caricatures of the other members of the career pack. People that devoted their entire lives to vigorously training for this one event. People that were ultimately willing to die to achieve what they believed was the greatest possible glory they could, only for those same people to have their corpses made a mockery of. Despite being districts favored by the capital, this is the moment that affirms to Cato that they are lumped in alongside the rest of them as being animal, inhuman, and savage. I'd argue this is the moment where he comes to the terrible realization that he and Katniss, he and Peeta are one and the same. But the big tragedy is that his fate was sealed the instant that he entered the arena. And on a more abstract, metaphorical level, Cato grows to be horrified by his own extreme violence. So I see this in part as him being essentially run down by caricatures of it.